The cable car from Mount Cermis to the Italian village of Cavalese was the scene of one of the world's most deadly accidents in 1976. 43 people died when a vehicle crashed more than 850 feet down the mountain. Sadly though, this would not be the last Cavalese cable car accident. The next one, however, would be under far more controversial circumstances. This is the story of the 1998 Cavalese cable car disaster. Nestled among the peaks of the Italian Dolomite mountain range is the small village of Cavalese. Home to around 4,000 people and situated more than 3,000 feet or 1,000 meters above sea level, the village is a splendid example of quaint European architecture, and the surrounding countryside make it as picturesque as it is remote. Following the end of the First World War, Cavalese saw rapid growth thanks to the development of the construction industry, most notably in the areas of wood, iron and marble. In more modern times though, Cavalese has become a world-renowned ski resort. With at least 140 kilometers or 87 miles of downhill skiing, and 123 marked ski runs served by more than 50 lifts, the village is now one of Europe's premier tourist destinations. One feature of the village and the surrounding valley are the numerous cable cars, also known as gondolas or aerial tramways. Every day thousands of passengers ride the cable car from Cavalese to the nearby ski fields of Mount Cermis. This cable car was the scene of one of the most deadly accidents of its kind when, in 1976, a broken support cable caused a fully loaded vehicle to tumble more than 250 meters or 820 feet down the mountain, killing 43 people, including 15 children. This was, however, not the last cable car accident the village would have to suffer. Roughly 60 miles or 100 kilometers to the southeast of Cavalese is the Aviano Air Base. Owned by the Italian Air Force, the base also hosts the US Air Force and the United States Marine Corps Aviation. On the afternoon of February 3rd, 1998, Flight EZ-01, an EA-6B Prowler belonging to the United States Marine Corps Aviation, took off from Aviano Air Base on a low-altitude training mission. The EA-6B Prowler was in service from 1971 through to 2019 and was used primarily to jam enemy radar and gather radio intelligence. As the Prowler has no air defense of its own, low-altitude training flights were critical, as that would be its only means of survival in a combat situation. The captain was Richard J. Ashby on his final flight with the squadron before an upcoming promotion to fighter pilot. The navigator, Captain Joseph Schweitzer, was responsible for planning the route and guiding the pilot through the tricky terrain. Also on board that day, riding in the back seats, were Captains Chandler Seagraves and William Rainey. Meanwhile, 60 miles or 100 kilometers to the northwest, the perfect weather conditions meant thousands of tourists from all across Europe packed the ski fields near Cavalese. Shortly after 3 p.m, a fully loaded cable car with 19 guests and 1 operator departed Mount Cermis for the approximate 15-minute descent to Cavalese. At around 3:13 p.m, Flight EZ-01 entered the Fiume Valley. A recent regulation change meant all aircraft, including military jets, must maintain a minimum above-ground altitude of 2,000 feet or 610 meters when flying through the valley. However, Flight EZ-01, captained by Richard J. Ashby, was flying at just 260 feet or 80 meters above ground level. Flying at a speed of 540 miles or 870 kilometers per hour, well above the permitted speed limit in the valley, the 2 front seat pilots spotted the 2.5-inch thick cable car wire in front of them. Banking hard left to avoid collision, the right wing struck the cable, badly damaging the wing and completely severing the cable. Although the plane had suffered severe damage to its vertical stabilizer and had a large tear in its wing, as well as an almost total loss of hydraulics, Captain Ashby and his crew managed to land safely. Although the crew were aware they had struck some kind of wire, navigator Joseph Schweitzer claimed in an interview it was only once leaving the aircraft and being told by a commanding officer they learned it was the cable car. This becomes more important later. Back in Cavalese, the devastation was horrific. The cable car had fallen more than 80 meters. Tragically, there were no survivors. Those who weren't killed by the fall were crushed under the weight of the cable car. Among the lives lost were 7 Germans, 5 Belgians, 3 Italians, 2 Poles, 2 Austrians, and 1 Dutch. In the immediate aftermath of the disaster, there was an intense anger among Italians. Rumours the pilots had been horsing around were beginning to spread. US President Bill Clinton offered an official apology and promised monetary compensation. The investigation into the tragedy was led by Marine Corps General Michael DeLong, 2 Italian colonels, and some civilian aviation accident experts. Once completed, the investigation determined the crew were flying too low and too fast, putting themselves and others at risk. The US Marine Corps agreed with this assessment. The investigation team suggested disciplinary actions be taken against the crew, and as a result, Captain Richard J. Ashby and his navigator Joseph Schweitzer both faced a military court-martial, charged with 20 counts of involuntary manslaughter and negligent homicide. The defense highlighted during the trial that the US military maps provided to the crew were missing any reference to cable car lines in the Fiume Valley. In contrast, on the Italian maps, they were clearly marked. The defense also said the pilots had not been informed of a new directive advising that the minimum above ground altitude in the valley was now 2,000 feet or 610 meters, up from the previous requirement of 1,000 feet. The prosecution team argued this was irrelevant, as at the time of the accident they were flying at 260 to 330 feet and well above the maximum speed limit. Navigator Captain Joseph Schweitzer claimed the radio altimeter had failed during the flight and didn't warn the crew of their low altitude. However, the investigation team refuted this claim, saying it had been checked and found to be working correctly during the investigation. It also came to light the crew had received a formal warning for flying too low in the month before the accident. Ultimately though, a jury consisting mostly of other airmen sided with the defendants, and both men were acquitted of the charges laid against them. However, a bombshell revelation was about to be uncovered. In exchange for immunity from prosecution, the 2 backseat pilots, Captain Chandler P. Seagraves and William L. Rainey, revealed the whole flight had been recorded on a personal camcorder. But upon landing, before exiting the plane, Schweitzer and Ashby had destroyed the tape. This led to them being put back on trial, this time for obstruction of justice. Although the men would admit destroying the tape before exiting the aircraft, they claimed to have done so only to prevent media using the footage of their faces beside that of the crashed cable car. This contradicted earlier claims to have learned of the cable car only after exiting the aircraft and being informed by a commanding officer. Both Richard J. Ashby and Joseph Schweitzer were found guilty of obstruction of justice. The 2 men were dishonorably discharged from the Navy and lost all future benefits. The families of each victim would eventually receive $1.9 million in compensation.